Darkness. A silence so heavy it seems to press against the ears. The flicker of a single candle casts shadows across wooden beams, stretching shapes that feel alive against the cold stone walls of a small, forgotten chapel. A bell tolls once in the distance. Its hollow echo carries across the fields where a funeral procession winds its way through the mist. At the head of the column, a coffin, simple and unadorned, borne by trembling hands. Inside lies another firstborn, gone just days after his 33rd birthday. For those who march in the slow rhythm of grief, this is not tragedy. This is not shock. This is inevitability. Their faces are lined not with surprise, but with a grim, ritual acceptance. They have walked this path too many times. They have buried too many firstborns. And though the years, the fashions, and even the languages of their ancestors may have changed, this one constant remained: no firstborn in their line ever lived beyond the age of 33. The camera lingers on a gravestone. Moss has claimed its edges, but the engraving remains sharp: born 1784, died 1817. Aged 33. Another stands just beside it, born 1821, died 1854. Aged 33. And another. And another. A field of carved stone, every marker different, yet identical in one chilling detail. The dates shift across centuries. The names fade in and out of memory. But the number 33 never falters. It is as though time itself obeys the rule of this curse. The narrator's voice slows, weighed down with the gravity of what is to come. Across towns, across countries, across bloodlines, a pattern endured, one so precise, so unwavering, that it transcends the boundaries of coincidence. For the firstborn child, no matter their gender, no matter their fortune, life ends at the threshold of the 34th year. Imagine the weight of such knowledge. A child is born, wrapped in swaddling cloth, placed in the arms of a weeping mother who already knows the day her son or daughter will die. The future becomes a countdown. Each birthday celebrated with muted joy, each passing year bringing not hope, but dread. And when that final year approaches, when the 33rd candle flickers atop the cake, families gather in silence. They share meals not with laughter, but with unspoken sorrow, because they know the feast is a last supper. The screen drifts across paintings of medieval villages, black and white photographs of Victorian families, and later, the silent reels of grainy 20th century footage. Each image is paired with an obituary, a name, a date, and the same haunting number. 33. Always 33. Was it an illness carried in the blood? A genetic inheritance too subtle for doctors to see, yet too ruthless to forgive? Was it punishment from God, striking firstborns as he once did in the plagues of Egypt? Or was it something older, something nameless, written into the marrow of humanity itself? The questions echo through time, but answers never come. The camera cuts to the interior of a farmhouse bedroom. A man lies still beneath a quilt, his breathing shallow, his skin pale. Beside him, his wife grips his hand, tears carving lines down her cheeks. He has just turned 33. Within hours, he will be gone. His brothers and sisters linger at the doorway, powerless. This scene has played out in hundreds of households, across continents, across generations, always with the same unrelenting outcome. And yet, this is not the story of one man, nor one family. It is the story of all firstborns bound to this fate. A chilling legacy that crosses oceans, languages, and faiths. It is the story of the curse that never loosens its grip. The narration grows hushed, as though reluctant to disturb the stillness of the graves. In parish records across rural England, in leather-bound Bibles handed down in American farmhouses, in forgotten ledgers tucked away in church basements in France and Germany, the same entries appear. Each one an epitaph, each one a grim arithmetic, where 33 is the only sum. The ink has faded, the paper has yellowed, but the truth remains. Families learn to speak of it only in whispers. New parents, holding their infant, would not rejoice but tremble. Some try to outwit the curse. A father in 1712 refused to name his firstborn until the child was 6, believing he could trick fate into sparing him. The boy died at 33, nameless in death. Another mother, terrified, registered her eldest as her second, forging the birth record. Still, the daughter died at 33, her grave marking the number that could not be denied. Superstition grew in tandem with sorrow. In some places, communities lit lanterns outside their homes when a firstborn reached the dreaded year, as if guiding them safely into the next life. Others rang bells on the night of a 33rd birthday, not as celebration, but as farewell. Slowly, these practices faded, erased by modern skepticism. But the deaths did not stop. The final images of this opening linger on a graveyard at dusk. The fog creeps low across the earth, and the stones stand like teeth in the earth's jaw. The camera closes on one final marker, a plain headstone, weather-worn but legible. Born 1932, died 1965. Aged 33. The voice of the narrator returns, heavy and unflinching. This is no coincidence. This is no mere story told to frighten children. This is a pattern carved into history, as relentless as death itself. No firstborn ever lived past their 33rd birthday. And what follows is the unraveling of that mystery, a descent into the chilling silence left behind by those who never saw their 34th year. Darkness falls. The candle flickers out. The screen turns black. The story begins. The story does not belong to a single village, nor a single nation. Instead, it stretches across landscapes that could not be more different, yet are bound by the same silent thread of tragedy. To understand the curse of the firstborn, we must step back into the world that birthed it, into the settings where lives unfolded, where families endured, and where grief was etched into the fabric of daily existence. Picture first the damp cobbled lanes of an 18th-century English hamlet. Smoke curls from chimneys, drifting low across thatched rooftops. Chickens scatter at the feet of women carrying baskets from the well, while children chase each other down muddy paths. Life is simple here, built around the rhythms of seasons and the tolling of church bells. Yet beneath the surface lies a shadow that no one can shake. For in nearly every household, the eldest child is mourned long before death arrives. The parish church records tell their tale in cramped handwriting. A baptism recorded in 1764. A burial recorded in 1797. The same name that appeared at the start of life now appears at its abrupt conclusion. The ink seems unremarkable at first glance, one line among hundreds, yet when read together, a pattern emerges so persistent it chills the blood. The names change. The occupations differ. But again and again, the same number appears at the end. Age, 33. The camera shifts from the damp greenness of England to the raw, endless expanse of the Appalachian valleys in early America. Families here lived by axe and plow, carving farms into the wilderness. They carried their faith across the ocean, along with the stories of loss that had followed them for generations. Inside cabins lit by firelight, the curse endured. Firstborn sons who once carried the hope of their families collapsed in the fields before their 34th year. Firstborn daughters, expected to marry, to bear, to extend the family's legacy, fell silent in childbirth or illness at the same fated age. Even here, thousands of miles from ancestral soil, the shadow stretched across the ocean and claimed them. The records in America echo those of the Old World. Family Bibles, their pages worn from fingers tracing names, carry the story forward. An entry from 1825, the birth of a boy. An entry from 1858, his death, aged 33. The pattern repeats again and again, as though the very blood flowing through their veins carried the secret of doom. Across continental Europe, the story is the same. In the valleys of France, in the forests of Germany, in the stone towns of Italy, families watched as firstborns faded before their time. Each community developed its own way of speaking, or not speaking, about the deaths. Some attributed it to God's mysterious will, citing biblical precedent, the death of Egypt's firstborn, a punishment so ancient it seemed to echo into the present. Others whispered of older things, of curses placed upon bloodlines in times no memory could reach. But for the families themselves, the explanations mattered less than the inevitability. Imagine being a parent in such a place. You watch your first child take their first steps, speak their first words, carry their first harvest, all the while knowing that the 33rd birthday will be their last. You raise them with love, but also with grief, a grief that grows heavier each passing year. Some parents built emotional walls, unable to bear attachment to a child they knew they would bury. Others clung tighter, suffocating their firstborns with desperate affection, trying to capture every fleeting moment before the curse claimed them. Siblings, too, lived beneath its shadow. Second and third children grew with the uneasy knowledge that they would outlive their eldest. Rivalry was poisoned by guilt, affection warped by dread. The family structure itself bent under the weight of the curse. Inheritance lines faltered, farms and trades left without their natural heirs, as firstborn after firstborn vanished at 33. The landscapes mirror this sorrow. In England, mist settles thick over graveyards where rows of markers bear the same number. In America, weathered wooden crosses tilt in forgotten plots behind cabins, each marking another firstborn laid to rest. In Europe, stone crypts whisper with the names of eldest children whose voices were cut short. The families learned to endure in silence. The rhythm of their lives became one of expectation and loss. Diaries from mothers speak of a joy laced with dread. My sweet Thomas is 6 today. God grant me strength to love him as I must, though I know what fate awaits. Another father writes, our John has taken well to the fields. I fear I will bury him before he can pass them to his son. These are not words of chance misfortune, but of resigned certainty. And still, the families persisted. They tilled their fields, spun their cloth, built their houses, and baptized new children. Life went on, because it had to. But beneath it all lay the unshakable knowledge that the eldest among them lived with a death sentence measured in years, not in chance. What makes the setting so chilling is its universality. This was not a single haunted village or cursed manor. It was not confined to one century or one faith. From the cobbles of Europe to the hills of America, across languages and traditions, the curse walked with them. And so the story of the firstborn becomes more than personal grief, it becomes a cultural scar, invisible but unforgotten. The narrator pauses, voice heavy with the weight of history. These were not extraordinary families. They were farmers, craftsmen, mothers, fathers, children. They were people like any other, bound to the same hopes, the same struggles, the same daily routines. And yet, their lives carried within them an invisible shadow, a destiny they could neither prevent nor explain. The setting is, therefore, not just physical, it is emotional. A landscape of quiet despair that threads through generations, shaping how people loved, how they raised children, how they buried their dead. To understand the curse of the firstborn is not simply to trace its records on paper, but to walk through these homes, to breathe the air of their villages, to hear the muted laughter of a birthday that everyone knew would be one of the last. As we leave this section of the story, the images of families linger. The mother staring out a frost-covered window as her son works the fields. The father sharpening tools in silence, knowing he will pass them not to his eldest, but to another. The siblings who learn not to plan futures with the brother or sister who will not live to see them. These lives form the backdrop of the mystery, grounding the curse not in fantasy, but in the soil of history, where every breath of joy was haunted by the promise of inevitable loss. And so, in every hamlet, every valley, every town touched by this strange inheritance, the pattern held. No matter the continent. No matter the faith. No matter the year. For the families who bore it, the curse was as real as the earth beneath their feet. The earliest whispers of the firstborn curse do not come from the pages of science, nor even from the meticulous hand of parish clerks, but from fragments of stories left scattered across centuries. To find its origins, we must listen to the faintest voices, preserved in brittle manuscripts, sermons, and chronicles that reach back to a world where myth and memory bled together. One of the first traces lies in a medieval manuscript from the 14th century, written in cramped Latin by a monk in Burgundy. His task was to record births, deaths, and donations to the abbey, yet amid his careful notes is a passage set apart, written with unusual urgency. It has been observed, he writes, that among the eldest of households in the nearby villages, not one survives beyond the 33rd year. The people whisper that this is God's judgment, though no priest dares to speak it aloud. The words stand out, trembling on the page, as though the scribe himself feared invoking something by naming it. In a dusty sermon from 1521, preached in a small church in rural England, another fragment surfaces. The priest, warning his congregation of the wages of sin, mentions a chilling detail, and as it is written, so too do we see among us, that the first of a house doth not live to see the age of Christ. The phrasing is telling. 33, the age at which Christ himself was said to have been crucified, became an ominous marker. Families whispered that their children were bound to the same fate, to die as Christ had died, before reaching the 34th year. Was this death divine imitation, or divine punishment? No one could agree. But the accounts did not remain confined to sermons. In the court records of 16th century Saxony, a father petitioned for his lands to be passed early to his second son, citing his eldest's approaching final year. The boy was 32. The petition was denied, but the record survives, and months later, so too does the boy's death entry, aged 33. The bureaucracy of inheritance quietly acknowledged the inevitability, even as officials refused to name it outright. The testimonies grow stranger as we move forward. In the margins of a diary kept by a physician in Paris in 1610, a curious observation appears. The doctor, who had treated noble families, wrote of a household where 3 generations of firstborn sons had all collapsed suddenly in their 33rd year, each after showing no sign of illness. He describes the deaths not as disease, but as a candle snuffed without warning. For all his medical training, he could offer no explanation. His words tremble between science and superstition, caught in the gap between what could be observed and what could not be explained. The stories continue into the New World. Among the Puritans in Massachusetts, the records of congregational ministers reveal their unease. In 1678, Reverend Samuel Willard wrote privately in his journal, "It is a strange thing, and most grievous, that in certain households the eldest son falleth at the 33rd year, as if struck by the hand of heaven. We do not speak of it in sermons, for fear of feeding superstition, but the pattern is spoken of in every hearth." His hesitation reflects the tension between faith and fear, between the need to guide a flock and the inability to deny what everyone witnessed. And yet, these deaths were rarely dramatic. They were not marked by violence or spectacle. They came quietly, suddenly, often in the midst of ordinary life. A farmer collapsed on the road home from market. A young mother failed to rise from her bed after childbirth. A merchant fell ill on a ship and was gone within a day. Always, the age was the same. Always, the line of inheritance was broken at the same number. These early accounts also reveal the beginnings of folklore. In the villages of the Rhineland, people whispered that the firstborn's fate was tied to an ancient pact, that some ancestor had bargained away their bloodline in exchange for survival during famine or war. In Scotland, tales spread of the mark of the first, a curse said to pass invisibly through baptism, sealing the eldest child's fate the moment holy water touched their brow. Such stories cannot be verified, but they capture the desperation of families who sought meaning in patterns too cruel to ignore. Even within families, the accounts tell of rituals emerging. Some parents, knowing what awaited, began to treat the 33rd year as a time of preparation. Meals became solemn. Eldest children were quietly excused from heavy labor, not to protect them, but to allow them peace in their final year. In certain parishes of France, faint records suggest that families commissioned prayers specifically on the eve of a 33rd birthday, as though bargaining with God for a reprieve. None came. What makes these early accounts so chilling is their consistency. The records come from different regions, different languages, different centuries. The people who wrote them had no means of correspondence, no shared folklore carried by travelers, no organized conspiracy. And yet, the details align. Again and again, the age 33 appears. Again and again, the eldest is buried while younger siblings live on. The sheer weight of the evidence makes coincidence feel impossible. Yet for every account preserved, countless others were lost. Fires consumed parish records. Wars destroyed villages. Paper decayed. But even in their absence, the stories linger in oral traditions, carried in fragments to later generations. A grandmother telling her granddaughter, "Do not count on your brother. He will not see long years." A midwife muttering, "The eldest is a child marked." A passing phrase, half believed, half dreaded, but never entirely dismissed. The early signs, then, are not only in documents but in the silence surrounding them. The reluctance of priests to name the curse aloud. The careful evasions in official records. The whispered phrases that survived even when ink did not. Together, they form a mosaic of unease, a picture of something too vast to be accident, yet too elusive to be proven. As the camera fades over these records, the cracked parchment, the inked pages, the fading diaries, the narrator's voice lingers. These were the first signs. Small notations in margins, whispers in pulpits, hushed conversations by firelight. The beginning of a truth families would come to know too well, that for the firstborn, life was not a path into old age, but a countdown. And when the clock struck 33, the end arrived with absolute certainty. By the time the curse of the firstborn was recognized as more than coincidence, the stories had already passed into whispers, spoken in kitchens, in taverns, in the quiet spaces between prayers. Unlike the records of priests or physicians, these accounts are not bound by ink, but by memory, fear, and the subtle language of rumor. They reveal not just how the pattern was observed, but how it was lived. Imagine a village at dusk in the 17th century. The day's work has ended, and families gather by firelight. Voices are low, not because the children must sleep, but because certain subjects cannot be spoken of in full. A neighbor leans in, her voice hushed, "It is his last year. You know it. We all know it." Heads nod solemnly, eyes shift toward the eldest son laughing by the hearth. He does not hear the words. Or perhaps he does, and pretends not to. For in communities bound together by survival, silence was often the only form of compassion. Witnesses to the curse spoke not of death alone, but of the long, invisible wait for it. Mothers described the 33rd year as a time of unbearable tension. One account, preserved in the notes of an Irish folklorist, describes a woman who baked bread daily for her eldest, pressing it into his hands each morning as though to reassure herself that he still lived. Each evening, when he returned home, she wept quietly in relief. The routine continued until, on the day he failed to return, the bread cooled untouched on the windowsill. Midwives, too, became reluctant keepers of the secret. When delivering a firstborn child, some would mutter a phrase beneath their breath, half blessing, half curse, "The first shall walk 33 years and no more." To mothers in the throes of labor, these words blurred into prayer. But the midwives, who had watched the pattern across countless households, knew better. They did not intend cruelty. They intended preparation. The whispers also shaped rituals. In parts of Central Europe, families treated a firstborn's 32nd birthday not as celebration but as farewell. Neighbors would gather, bringing food, drink, and solemn blessings. The feast was festive on the surface, yet beneath the laughter lay dread. It was not the beginning of another year, but the prelude to an ending. Witnesses described these gatherings as heavy, the joy forced, the silences too long. In private, children asked their parents why the eldest always cried during such feasts. No answer was ever given. For those outside the families, the whispers grew into darker suspicions. In some communities, neighbors believed the curse to be punishment for hidden sins. They made a pact, one rumor went, long ago, with something they should not have named. Others pointed to scripture, claiming that God himself had marked these families, just as he had struck the firstborn of Egypt. In this way, the families became objects of both pity and suspicion. To marry into such a line was seen as dangerous, even reckless. Witnesses describe betrothals broken, proposals refused, and alliances quietly avoided, all because of the curse that hovered over a household. Even children absorbed the whispers. A Scottish school record from 1724 preserves a note from a teacher who complained that his pupils mocked one boy, chanting that he would not see Christ's years twice. The cruelty of children was sharpened by fear, their words echoing the adults who spoke more cautiously behind closed doors. For the firstborn themselves, the whispers were not background noise but an ever-present reminder. To live as a firstborn was to live surrounded by voices predicting your end. Yet the whispers also reveal resilience. Families developed their own private ways of softening the dread. Some invented sayings that cloaked the curse in poetry: the eldest burns brightest, but the flame is short. Others gave their firstborns names linked to hope or eternity, as though to counteract the brevity of their lives. Witnesses recalled mothers who dressed their eldest in finer clothes, gave them the best cuts of meat, or spared them from harsh chores, not out of favoritism but out of desperation to make their shortened years meaningful. The psychology of the curse deepened as the whispers spread. Witnesses noted that some firstborn seemed to carry the weight consciously. In diaries, men wrote of feeling watched, counted down, as though time itself stalked them. Women wrote of choosing not to marry, not to bear children, unwilling to pass the curse forward. Their voices, though faint, hint at the devastating burden of living a life marked not by possibility, but by an expiration date known to all. But perhaps the most chilling element is how ordinary it became. Whispers were not cries of shock, but murmurs of expectation. When a firstborn collapsed in the fields, villagers sighed, it was his time. When a young woman died in childbirth at 33, neighbors muttered, it could not be otherwise. Death ceased to be an intruder and became instead a guest whose arrival was scheduled and accepted. Folklorists who gathered these testimonies centuries later were struck not by hysteria, but by calm resignation. One wrote, they did not speak of the deaths with panic, but with the same tone they used to describe harvests and winters. The curse was, to them, a fact of life. It was this very ordinariness that made the whispers so unnerving. For in a world of rumor and fear, nothing is more frightening than a horror that is no longer questioned, but expected. As the camera pans across faces frozen in sepia photographs, the narrator's voice falls quiet. Witnesses and whispers, not records, not science, not proclamations, kept the truth alive. It was in the eyes of mothers, in the mutterings of midwives, in the cruel rhymes of children, in the quiet dread of siblings who waited for the day when their eldest would not return. These whispers formed the living memory of the curse, carrying it forward through generations. And so, in every hearth, in every village, in every corner of the world touched by this strange inheritance, the whispers endured. They did not need parchment or ink. They did not need sermons or science. They passed from mouth to ear, from parent to child, until the curse was no longer rumor, but reality woven into the breath of daily life. For centuries, the curse of the firstborn lived not only in whispers, but in tension with the powers that sought to silence it. Churches, governments, and even physicians understood the danger of such a story. To admit it was to acknowledge a mystery beyond their control. And so, just as families quietly endured the grief, institutions quietly buried the evidence. Denial became policy. Suppression became survival. In parish churches across Europe, priests faced the same reality as their flock. They stood at the bedsides of dying firstborns. They officiated funerals where the age of 33 was carved again and again into gravestones. Yet from the pulpit, they forbade discussion. A bishop in Spain wrote in 1682 that, to spread talk of the curse is to invite the devil into God's house. Priests who privately admitted their doubts warned parishioners never to record them. The church did not deny the deaths, but it denied the pattern. By branding it superstition, it kept the faithful from asking questions it could not answer. This silence extended to the written record. Where parish clerks once wrote meticulous notes on birth and death, later entries grew vague. A burial listed only as, in his 33rd year, without acknowledging its repetition. In some parishes, the ages were rounded, altered, or omitted altogether. What had once been a consistent mark became a careful absence. The denial was not ignorance, but deliberate omission, as though to erase the curse by erasing the evidence. Yet the people knew. Their silence was not belief in coincidence, but obedience to authority. In one village in northern France, the story survives of a family who dared to speak of the curse publicly. The father, after burying his eldest son at 33, declared before the congregation that the curse was real. Within weeks, he was summoned by the bishop, fined heavily, and branded a heretic for spreading superstition. His family withdrew into isolation, shunned not only for their grief, but for their defiance. To speak of the curse aloud was to invite condemnation, not compassion. The Enlightenment, with its promise of reason and science, did not lift this silence. Instead, it added a new layer of dismissal. Physicians in the 18th century began cataloging unusual illnesses, searching for natural explanations. But when confronted with the pattern of 33, they scoffed. Coincidence, wrote one doctor in London in 1745. The mind sees what it wishes to see. His private journal, however, betrays unease. He describes a family in which 5 generations of firstborns died at precisely the same age. He offers no diagnosis, only silence. Publicly, he denied it. Privately, he could not explain it. This duality became common. Doctors and scientists dismissed the curse in lectures and journals, ridiculing families who believed in it. Yet in their private notes, many recorded the uncanny repetition. Their refusal to admit it was not born of certainty, but of fear, fear of ridicule from their peers, fear of confessing ignorance, fear of standing before a mystery science could not yet measure. Denial, once the tool of priests, became the tool of physicians. Governments, too, played their part. In small towns where records were carefully kept, officials noticed the disruption in inheritance laws. Estates passed not to the eldest, but to younger siblings, again and again. Land courts grew tired of disputes and quietly changed their practices. In some regions, officials simply assumed that the second son would inherit, regardless of the eldest's age. They did not publish decrees. They did not acknowledge the curse. They simply built silence into the law. For the families, this suppression deepened their isolation. They could not speak openly of their grief. They could not seek explanation from priests or doctors. They lived with knowledge they could not share, grief they could not name, a fate they could not prevent. Mothers wept alone in their kitchens. Fathers buried their sons with clenched jaws. Children grew up hearing their parents warn them in whispers, but in public, they were told to remain silent. The weight of denial pressed as heavily as the curse itself. This suppression also altered the folklore. In places where the church was strongest, the curse was whispered as sin, families marked by God for hidden transgressions. Where physicians mocked belief, it became a story of madness, parents imagined patterns that did not exist. In both cases, the blame shifted from the curse itself to the families who carried it. They were accused of superstition, of hysteria, of weakness. The real cruelty of denial was not only silence, but stigma. Still, the evidence refused to vanish. Cemeteries filled with gravestones marked, aged 33. Family Bibles carried names with identical endings. Even when priests altered the records, the stones in the earth did not lie. Travelers noted the strange clusters, writing cautiously in their journals. It is peculiar, wrote a visitor to Bavaria in 1793, that in this village, so many of the eldest are buried in their 33rd year. He did not expand. He did not explain. But his words, like so many others, slipped through the cracks of suppression, reminding us that silence cannot erase truth. By the 19th century, denial had hardened into cultural reflex. families knew better than to speak. Authorities no longer punished talk of the curse because there was no need. Generations had learned that silence was safer. The curse was endured privately, accepted quietly, buried literally and figuratively beneath layers of stone and shame. To outsiders, life in these communities looked ordinary. To insiders, every household carried a secret wound, never acknowledged in public. The narrator's voice lowers, almost conspiratorial. Denial, then, did not end the curse. It simply changed its shape. By forbidding open discussion, by ridiculing those who sought answers, the institutions of church and state ensured that the curse persisted in darkness, hidden but undefeated. The silence itself became part of the legacy, as families were forced to live not only with death, but with the burden of secrets. And so, the curse of the firstborn survived not only in graves and whispers, but in absence, in the lines omitted from records, in the words unsaid at funerals, in the truths denied by those who feared them. Suppression could not erase the pattern. It could only bury it deeper, where it continued to pulse, unseen, waiting. The silence imposed by church, state, and science did not erase the curse. Instead, it forced it inward, into the minds and souls of those who lived beneath its shadow. If earlier generations bore it with quiet grief, the 19th century marked a shift. Denial had been so effective that it created an eerie paradox: the curse became both unspeakable and undeniable. Families carried knowledge they could not voice, and in that space of forbidden truth, psychology itself began to fracture. Imagine a household where the eldest child grows under a clock invisible to the rest of the world. At first, the number 33 seems distant, almost unreal. But as the years pass, every birthday becomes sharper. The 25th is not joy, but warning. The 30th, not a milestone, but a sentence. By the 32nd year, life itself becomes a countdown. In diaries from this era, recovered in private archives, eldest sons write of feeling death at my shoulder, and of seeing 33 as a wall I cannot climb. These were not men wasting away from disease. Many were healthy, strong, ambitious. Yet the knowledge gnawed at them, hollowing their confidence. The curse became not only a fate, but a weight. Families suffered in their own way. Mothers hovered with desperate tenderness, watching their eldest sons grow, knowing they were raising them for an early grave. Fathers, hardened by loss, grew cold, refusing to invest their love fully in children doomed to die. Siblings lived in a strange mix of envy and guilt. To be the second-born was to inherit the land, the family name, and the future. But it also meant inheriting at the expense of a brother's life. Resentment simmered quietly, while guilt whispered even louder. Within these households, the curse poisoned relationships before it ever claimed a life. Communities, too, felt the psychological tremors. Entire villages carried the burden, because in many places the curse did not strike a single family, but several. It became woven into the social fabric. Wedding proposals were made with hushed inquiries: is he the eldest? Will she marry a firstborn? Some families concealed birth order, lying to prospective in-laws, insisting their second child was the first. Secrets layered upon secrets. The curse was not just a private grief but a public negotiation of reputation and survival. And as silence deepened, folklore twisted. Denied official recognition, the curse grew monstrous in imagination. In the Rhineland, people whispered that a raven circled the house of a doomed firstborn on his final birthday. In Hungary, they spoke of a faceless woman who appeared in mirrors as the clock struck midnight on the 33rd year. In Ireland, mothers warned their children that the devil himself came for the eldest when his age matched the years of Christ. These stories were not official teachings, but underground mythologies, born of fear and suppressed grief. They reflected not only death itself, but the psychological need to give shape to the unspeakable. The rise of medicine brought no relief. If anything, it sharpened the psychological torment. Doctors scoffed at curses, yet they brought no cure. Families still buried their firstborn sons at 33, but now with the added sting of being told they were superstitious. This gaslighting deepened despair. Parents came to believe the fault must lie within them. Mothers accused themselves of weak wombs, cursed blood, or hidden sins. Fathers drank, hardened, or abandoned faith altogether. A family curse became an individual shame, a secret to be carried without help. Some eldest sons rebelled against the shadow, daring fate with reckless abandon. Diaries tell of men who fought in wars, traveled to foreign lands, gambled fortunes, or indulged in dangerous excess. If death waited at 33, they would race it, live furiously, and burn quickly. Others went the opposite way, retreating into solitude, afraid to form bonds or bear children, lest they pass the curse onward. Both paths led to isolation, one in wild abandon, the other in quiet despair. The psychological toll extended beyond individuals. Scholars of folklore note that regions most afflicted by the curse often developed darker art, music, and poetry. In Bavarian ballads, the eldest son is a doomed wanderer. In Polish folktales, the oldest child becomes a martyr, sacrificed for family prosperity. Even in architecture, some patterns emerge, houses where the eldest's room was kept small, temporary, as though never intended for permanence. The curse shaped not only private grief, but cultural expression. And then, there was the terror of turning 33 itself. Imagine a man in his 32nd year, his birthday approaching. Each tick of the clock, each nightfall, brought him closer to the threshold. Accounts describe men who stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped speaking as the day drew near. Some died days before their birthday, as though dread itself consumed them. Others passed on the very night, their families watching with grim resignation. In these cases, it is impossible to separate fate from psychology. Was it the curse that killed them, or the belief in the curse? The line between myth and mortality blurred until they became inseparable. Perhaps the most chilling escalation, however, came when families tried to outwit the curse. Some eldest sons changed their names, pretending to be younger siblings. Others falsified records, altering birth dates so they would never reach 33. A few even fled, cutting ties with family and village to start anew where no one knew their age. Yet, again and again, the curse seemed to find them. One man in Italy, recorded as having fled under a false name at 25, was discovered dead in another town at 33, his gravestone bearing the truth, as though fate itself had corrected the lie. Attempts at escape only deepened the psychological torment, as families realized even denial could not deliver them. By the dawn of the 20th century, the curse of the firstborn had become less a superstition and more a psychological inheritance. It was not merely that the eldest sons died, it was that they lived in anticipation of death. Their families, their communities, even their cultures arranged themselves around the inevitability. The curse was no longer just a mystery of graves, it was a slow erosion of the human spirit, passed from one generation to the next like an invisible disease of the mind. The narrator's tone lowers, haunting and deliberate. Here, the escalation is not measured in bodies alone, but in the quiet collapse of certainty, faith, and love. If the earlier centuries taught families to silence their grief, the 19th century taught them to live with it until it consumed them. The curse had grown beyond a pattern of death. It had become a psychological labyrinth from which there was no escape. And so, by the time the modern world arrived, families burdened with the curse were not only haunted by loss, but by the unbearable weight of anticipation. The deaths of the firstborn did not only steal lives, they stole joy itself, ensuring that entire generations lived under shadows they could not dispel. For centuries, the curse of the firstborn hovered like a phantom, whispered by priests, shunned by scholars, feared by families. But by the late 19th and early 20th century, a new force began to rise, the age of science. Rationality, statistics, and medicine promised explanations for mysteries that faith and folklore had failed to solve. Yet, when scientists and thinkers turned their gaze upon the firstborn curse, their answers only deepened the enigma. The earliest attempts were medical. Physicians scouring parish records noticed the recurring age of death, 33. Some attributed it to consumption of the chest, a vague term that likely referred to tuberculosis. Others believed congenital heart defects were to blame, arguing that the firstborn, born to younger and less experienced mothers, may have suffered from subtle developmental weaknesses. But this theory faltered when healthy, robust men, farmers, soldiers, and laborers, collapsed suddenly on their 33rd birthday, with no prior sign of illness. The medical records did not align neatly with disease. By the 1880s, statisticians attempted to bring order through numbers. In German university circles, debates raged: was this truly a curse, or merely coincidence magnified by grief? One scholar, Friedrich Adler, attempted to calculate the odds. He compiled birth and death registers from 47 parishes where the curse had been reported. His conclusion was unsettling: while death at any age is possible, the clustering at 33 was statistically significant, far beyond random chance. His report, published briefly in a Bavarian journal, was ridiculed and suppressed. To admit that numbers pointed to something uncanny was intolerable to the scientific establishment. The suppression only fueled speculation. Psychologists then entered the discussion. The newly emerging field of psychoanalysis suggested that belief itself could kill. The eldest son, raised from birth to expect death at 33, might unknowingly fulfill the prophecy through stress, despair, and psychosomatic illness. The power of the mind, they argued, could weaken the body. This idea gained traction in Vienna, where early disciples of Freud spoke of death imprinting, a psychological curse passed through family expectation. Yet, even they admitted a gap. How did the belief begin? Why 33, and not 30, or 40? The origin of the number remained untouched. Anthropologists offered a different angle. They connected the curse to ancient sacrificial traditions. In some pre-Christian tribes of Europe, the eldest son was ritually offered, either in war, in servitude, or even in death, to secure prosperity for the family. Could the curse be a cultural echo, carried forward subconsciously, long after the rituals ended? Families, they argued, reenacted an ancient myth without realizing it. 33, they suggested, might mark the age of prime strength, when sacrifice carried the greatest symbolic weight. Religious scholars, however, saw a more chilling explanation. 33, they pointed out, was the age of Christ at his crucifixion. The death of the firstborn at this age, they claimed, was not mere coincidence but a dark inversion of the Christian story. Where Christ died to redeem mankind, these eldest sons died as a punishment upon their bloodlines, a lingering echo of biblical wrath. Some even linked it to the story of Egypt's firstborn struck down in Exodus. The pattern, they warned, revealed a curse written not by men, but by God himself. But the scientific age did not stop at folklore or theology. In the 20th century, as genetics rose to prominence, new theories emerged. Researchers speculated that perhaps a hereditary disorder afflicted only the eldest. Could it be a recessive trait, triggered by birth order, nutrition, or maternal health at the first pregnancy? Some proposed a syndrome tied to blood clotting or cardiac failure, one that remained silent until triggered by the stresses of adulthood. A handful of post-mortem studies were conducted on families who volunteered their tragic histories. Results were inconclusive. No consistent gene, no single mutation, was found. More radical scientists pushed further into fringe theories. Parapsychologists in the 1920s claimed the curse was not biological, but energetic. The eldest son, they suggested, carried the psychic burden of family legacy, and that pressure manifested as a literal, fatal force. They pointed to cultures where shamans warned of life force exhaustion, and claimed that modern science had lost touch with these hidden laws. Skeptics dismissed them, but their writings spread quietly, fueling new cults of belief. Then came the sociologists. They argued that the curse was never supernatural, never genetic, but purely social. The eldest son bore the heaviest responsibilities: inheritance, leadership, continuation of family honor. That weight, they suggested, crushed him by midlife. The symbolic age of 33, the age of completion, in many traditions, became the breaking point. Death, then, was not fate, but metaphor made flesh. Yet, again, critics asked, how could metaphor kill with such precision, across centuries, across nations, across families who never spoke to one another? Throughout the 20th century, as rational explanations multiplied, so too did contradictions. Each theory explained part of the curse but left the whole intact. Medical science could not explain the exact age. Psychology could not explain the origin. Folklore could not explain the consistency. Genetics could not identify the mechanism. The mystery remained whole, even as it was dissected piece by piece. And then, there were the anomalies. For every family haunted by the curse, there were exceptions, eldest sons who lived past 33, who broke the pattern. Scientists seized upon these survivors. Were they evidence the curse was false? Or proof that some hidden variable shielded them? Interviews with such men revealed no clear answers. Some lived recklessly, others cautiously. Some believed in the curse, others laughed it off. Their survival deepened, rather than solved, the riddle. Perhaps the most haunting attempt at explanation came not from doctors, priests, or scholars, but from the families themselves. In their private letters, journals, and oral traditions, they spoke of something deeper than medicine or myth. They wrote of shadows in the bloodline, of debts owed to the past, of grief that refused to die. To them, the curse was not reducible to science, nor explainable by theory. It was lived reality, a burden passed from parent to child, too consistent to deny, too cruel to understand. The narrator's voice falls, deliberate and somber. Here, the weight of unanswered questions presses heavily. Every attempt to explain, medical, statistical, psychological, cultural, genetic, circles the mystery but never pierces it. The curse of the firstborn resists science just as it resisted religion, existing in that uneasy space between myth and fact, belief and biology. And so, by the mid-20th century, scholars were left in a strange position. To study the curse was to confront the limits of human knowledge. Rationality faltered. Numbers bent. Explanations collapsed. What remained was a haunting truth, that something, whether born of blood or of belief, continued to claim eldest sons with eerie precision, at the age of 33. The silence hangs. The mystery endures. And the search for explanation, though vast and varied, brings us no closer to certainty, only deeper into the labyrinth. The curse of the firstborn might sound like a relic of forgotten centuries, a myth best left to dusty parish records and fading superstition. Yet the unsettling truth is this: whispers of the curse have not vanished. They persist. From rural villages in Europe to quiet towns in America, from family estates in India to immigrant households in Australia, stories surface even in the modern age. Eldest sons, living under the shadow of 33, still look to their birthdays with unease. Some perish. Some endure. And those who survive become witnesses, guardians of a dark inheritance that refuses to die. One of the most chilling accounts emerged in 1964, in the countryside of northern France. A man named Lucien Dufresne, a farmer's eldest son, celebrated his 33rd birthday with his family. By all appearances he was healthy, strong, and cheerful. That night, after raising a toast, he excused himself to fetch more wine. Moments later, he collapsed in the cellar. The doctor ruled it a sudden cardiac arrest. Neighbors whispered otherwise. They knew his grandfather, also the firstborn, had died on his 33rd birthday in the same farmhouse. His father, likewise the eldest, had died in a similar manner. To the village, it was not medicine. It was the curse. Across the Atlantic, in 1979, another case shook a family in Kentucky. James Holloway, a factory worker, confessed to friends weeks before his 33rd birthday that he feared he would not live to see the age of 34. His grandfather and father had both died suddenly at that age. Despite reassurances, James grew pale and anxious as the day approached. On the night of his birthday, he failed to return home. His body was found in his truck the next morning. The coroner listed respiratory failure of unknown origin. His younger brother later told reporters, it was the curse. He believed it too much. And it found him. But perhaps the most haunting stories are not of those who died, but of those who lived. Survivors speak with voices heavy with memory, their words caught between relief and dread. In the late 1980s, an Englishman named Christopher Baines documented his family's ordeal. He was the eldest son of an old Midlands family where the curse was infamous. His grandfather had died at 33, and so had his uncle. As his own 33rd birthday approached, he was plagued by insomnia and nightmares of coffins and graves. On the night itself, he sat awake in a chair, clutching a Bible. Midnight passed. The clock ticked forward. He was alive. Yet in his memoir, written years later, Baines confessed something chilling: when the hour was over, I felt no joy. Only an emptiness. The curse had not taken me. But it had taken my peace. I have never been free since. In 1997, a journalist in Warsaw uncovered an archive of letters belonging to a Polish family haunted by the curse. Among them were notes from the 1960s in which the eldest son, Andrzej, wrote of his dread. He believed he would die at 33. Yet the letters continued into his 40s, his 50s, even his 70s. He had survived. But he admitted in his writings that the belief had ruled his life. He avoided risk, abandoned ambitions, and withdrew from society. He did not die at 33. Yet he did not truly live beyond it either. Survivorship, in its own way, became another prison. Modern encounters also reveal strange patterns of defiance. In 2005, an eldest son from southern Italy told interviewers that his family curse had killed both his father and grandfather at 33. Determined not to repeat their fate, he changed his identity, moved abroad, and lived under a new name. He claimed that by rejecting his role as the Firstborn, he severed the curse. On his 33rd birthday, he threw a public celebration, daring fate to strike him down. It did not. To this day, he remains alive, though his cousins, still bound to the family estate, whisper that he cheated destiny, and that a debt still lingers in their bloodline. Not all encounters end in dread. Some modern families have embraced rituals of protection. In parts of Ireland, priests are still quietly asked to bless eldest sons approaching 33. In Greek villages, elders recommend pilgrimage on the fated birthday, believing holy ground can ward off the curse. In India, certain families perform symbolic sacrifices, offering livestock or grain in place of the sun. Whether superstition or salvation, many who undergo these rites report a sense of survival not entirely explained by reason. Yet, in the modern world, skepticism walks hand in hand with belief. Doctors dismiss these accounts as anxiety-induced tragedies. Psychologists argue that the curse is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The stress of fearing death can trigger real heart attacks, strokes, or nervous collapses. Statisticians suggest we hear only of the families who fit the pattern, while countless eldest sons live normal lives, forgotten by history. And yet, when stories from France, Kentucky, Poland, and Italy echo with such uncanny similarity, even skeptics pause. Coincidence can explain some things. But can it explain centuries? Technology has not silenced the curse, either. In recent years, online forums have appeared where individuals, mostly men nearing their 33rd birthday, share fears, ask for advice, and search for solidarity. Posts appear with titles like, "Will I make it past 33?" and "The curse runs in my family, help." Some right after the date has passed, relieved and exhilarated. Others never return to post again, leaving fellow members to wonder in silence. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of modern encounters is how survivors describe their lives afterward. Many speak of lingering dread, as if the curse, though defied, never truly loosens its grip. They describe feeling watched, as though a debt remains unpaid. Others report sudden deaths of siblings or cousins soon after their own 33rd birthday, as though fate merely shifted its focus. Survival, they warn, is never absolute. The curse adapts. It moves. It waits. And then there are cases where the curse seems to falter, or perhaps to evolve. A family in Argentina claims that, beginning in the 1990s, the deaths no longer struck at 33, but at 42. Another family in Japan reports that the burden shifted from eldest sons to eldest daughters. Such accounts suggest that the curse is not fixed, but mutable, its rules bending with time. If true, this would make it not weaker, but far more terrifying, a force that changes shape yet never disappears. The narrator's voice drops to a near whisper. What does it mean to live with such knowledge in the modern age, to be born under the shadow of a death foretold, in a world of science, technology, and reason? Survivors say it means walking with a ghost at your side. A ghost that cannot be photographed, cannot be measured, but can be felt in every heartbeat as the clock approaches midnight on that fated year. Some find strength in survival. Others find only emptiness. But all agree on one thing: the curse is not history. It is alive. It breathes through those who inherit it. And whether one dies, or endures, or breaks the pattern entirely, no firstborn ever escapes unchanged. The camera lingers on modern faces, grainy photographs, blurred digital snapshots, trembling video recordings, each showing men and women who have lived in the shadow of 33. Their eyes hold the same expression, a mixture of fear, defiance, and weary knowledge. The curse of the firstborn is not buried in the past. It lives among us still. For centuries, whispers of the curse of the firstborn have terrified families across continents. Yet alongside fear has always been resistance. Human beings, when faced with shadows that defy reason, have never surrendered without a fight. They have prayed, bargained, sacrificed, invented rituals, and devised strange strategies to ward off the fate of the eldest son. Across time and cultures, survivors and witnesses have offered theories, explanations that range from the supernatural to the psychological, from the deeply spiritual to the coldly scientific. To understand these theories is to glimpse not only the mystery of the curse but also the desperate ingenuity of those who live beneath it. The first and oldest explanation is divine punishment. Rooted in scripture and folklore, this theory claims the curse is God's wrath, a consequence of pride, sin, or ancestral transgression. The most famous biblical precedent is the plague of Egypt, when, according to the Old Testament, the angel of death swept across the land, sparing only the houses marked with lamb's blood. For many believers, the modern curse of the firstborn is a lingering echo of that judgment, a reminder that certain sins are not forgotten. Families who hold this belief often turn to the church. Priests are called to bless eldest sons, to fast with them, or to lead midnight vigils on the dreaded birthday. Survivors often credit prayer, pilgrimage, or penance as the reason they endured. Yet skeptics argue that such faith may serve only to calm the mind, a placebo against terror, not a shield against fate. A second theory lies in bloodlines themselves. Some folklorists propose that the curse is hereditary, a genetic flaw hidden in certain families. They argue that what seems like a supernatural pattern is, in fact, a medical condition that emerges with uncanny regularity at a particular age. Heart defects, neurological disorders, or rare syndromes might strike suddenly in adulthood, explaining why eldest sons appear doomed. Still, geneticists who have studied such cases rarely find evidence to support the exact age of 33. And so the hereditary theory remains unsettled, half science, half legend, unable to explain the eerie precision of the deaths. Then comes the psychological explanation, the theory of the self-fulfilling prophecy. This idea holds that belief itself is the weapon. If a man grows up hearing that he will die at 33, the stress alone may consume him. Anxiety can elevate blood pressure, trigger heart attacks, or even cause sudden collapse. In this sense, the curse is not a mystical force but the crushing weight of expectation, passed down like an invisible inheritance. Survivors who adopt this view often describe nights filled with dread, stomachs tied in knots, and an overwhelming sense of doom as the fatal birthday approaches. Some even claim they could feel death hovering in the room, though doctors insisted their bodies were sound. But perhaps the most chilling theory is sacrificial transfer, the idea that the curse demands blood, but that blood can be substituted. Historical records reveal families that attempted to trick fate by offering livestock, wealth, or even another child in place of the eldest son. In medieval Ireland, families are said to have buried black rams at crossroads, believing the animal's life would buy their heir another year. In some parts of Africa, oral traditions speak of firstborn sons who survived after siblings or cousins died suddenly, as though the curse had leapt from one branch of the family to another. Survivors who hold this belief often carry crushing guilt, haunted by the idea that someone else died in their place. Another explanation draws from numerology and astrology. The number 33 has long been considered powerful, even sacred. In Christian mysticism, it marks the age of Christ at crucifixion. In esoteric traditions, it represents completion, transformation, and sacrifice. Astrologers point to Saturn's return, a cosmic cycle that occurs roughly every 29 to 30 years and is said to herald great upheaval. For some families, the curse is framed not as punishment, but as destiny written in the stars. Eldest sons are believed to carry the weight of transformation for their lineage. Surviving past 33 is not just endurance, but transcendence. Those who believe this often mark the year with rituals of rebirth, shaving their heads, fasting, or renouncing worldly goods, as if to prove to fate that they have been remade. And then there are the more sinister theories, those that whisper of deals struck with forces best left unnamed. In many traditions, curses are not accidents but contracts. Some claim the curse of the firstborn was born when an ancestor bargained with the devil, or with a spirit of death, trading generations of heirs for wealth or power. If this is true, survival does not come from prayer or medicine, but from renegotiation. In recent decades, occult practitioners have claimed to perform bindings and reversals, rituals designed to sever ancestral contracts. Yet even they admit the cost is high. One must give something in return, years of life, a piece of the soul, or the safety of another loved one. Survivors who whisper of such bargains often refuse to elaborate further, as though even speaking the details aloud might awaken something waiting in the dark. Among folklorists, one of the most intriguing theories is that of substitution through identity. Eldest sons, aware of their fate, have sometimes changed their names, moved to new lands, or symbolically died on paper. Records exist of men who staged funerals for themselves, emerging under new identities as second sons in the eyes of fate. Astonishingly, some appear to have lived long lives thereafter. The question remains, was this clever manipulation of superstition, or genuine evasion of something otherworldly? Modern science, of course, offers its own explanations. Doctors suggest stress, genetics, and environmental triggers. Sociologists frame the curse as a cultural artifact, a story powerful enough to kill by belief alone. Yet even the most rational voices acknowledge a troubling detail: the curse is not isolated to one culture, one religion, or one continent. Its echoes are global, surfacing in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas alike. Coincidence, perhaps? Or something deeper, a shadow in the human psyche that resurfaces across civilizations? Amid these competing theories, what emerges most clearly is not a single answer but a portrait of human endurance. Families have faced the curse with faith, with science, with ritual, with desperation. Some have survived by embracing belief. Others by rejecting it entirely. And in every generation, there are those who seek to break the cycle, declaring defiantly that fate can be outwitted. The narrator's voice grows lower, drawing the listener in. Imagine being that firstborn son, raised from childhood with whispers in your ear, "You will not live beyond 33. Do you laugh it off? Do you believe it? Do you change your life around it? Do you risk it? Theories abound, but each carries its own shadow. Prayer offers hope, but perhaps false comfort. Science offers logic, but cannot explain everything. Rituals promise protection, but often leave scars. And survival, though possible, may demand a price that echoes long after the birthday candles are blown out. In the end, perhaps the curse of the firstborn is less about death than it is about the struggle against inevitability. Every theory, whether divine, genetic, psychological, or occult, reflects humanity's refusal to accept powerlessness. To resist the curse is to declare, I am more than my bloodline. I am more than fate. The camera lingers on ancient texts, family trees, and ritual altars, then fades to the faces of modern survivors. Their eyes reveal the truth. Theories are many. Answers are few. But resistance is eternal. And so, the question remains, not only how does one die beneath the curse, but how does one live? Fear is a strange inheritance. Unlike gold, land, or property, it does not enrich those who receive it. It corrodes, gnaws, and lingers. Yet fear is passed down with the same certainty as bloodlines, shaping generations long after the original spark has faded. And when it comes to the curse of the firstborn, fear is perhaps the truest heirloom of all. For centuries, families have lived in its shadow. Some accepted it quietly, raising their sons with prayers and superstitions, preparing them for the age of 33 as though it were a final exam of life. Others resisted, laughing nervously at the legends, yet glancing over their shoulders when night fell. In every case, the fear itself became part of daily life, a silent participant at every meal, a ghost at every birthday celebration, a shadow in every cradle where a firstborn son was laid. Psychologists often speak of generational trauma, the way suffering echoes across time. A mother who loses her eldest son does not heal in isolation. She passes her grief to her surviving children. They, in turn, raise their own children under the weight of caution, superstition, and whispered warnings. Soon, entire family trees bend under the strain of a single story. The curse may take one life, but the fear it inspires lives on in dozens, perhaps hundreds more. Consider the case of the von Habsburg dynasty of Austria, where whispers of a doomed bloodline haunted the royal court for centuries. Chroniclers note how eldest sons, even in times of prosperity, walked with the air of men already condemned. Ministers, servants, and even foreign envoys remarked upon the tension in the palace whenever an heir approached his 33rd year. Whether or not the curse claimed them, the fear of it dictated their choices. Wars were delayed. Marriages were hurried. Alliances were broken. Fear was no longer a private burden, it became a force that steered history. And so it is with many families touched by the legend. The curse, true or not, alters the path of lives. Young men who believe they will not live long may refuse to build futures. Some never marry, unwilling to leave widows and fatherless children behind. Others marry too quickly, desperate to leave behind a legacy before fate arrives. Careers are abandoned, journeys postponed, and talents wasted. The curse claims not only bodies but possibilities. It takes the unwritten chapters of life and tears them from the book before they can be read. Fear is not always silent, however. Sometimes it demands to be spoken. In interviews conducted across cultures, firstborn sons describe an odd mixture of dread and resignation. One man in rural Italy, aware of the legend since boyhood, confessed that each birthday past 30 felt like stolen time. Another in India admitted he refused to drive at night during his 33rd year, convinced even a small risk could be the doorway through which the curse entered. A man in Brazil revealed that he had celebrated his 33rd birthday alone in a locked room, refusing visitors, food, or drink for 24 hours, believing that if death came it would have to face him directly. He survived, but admitted he never truly lived again, for the fear remained, just as heavy, even after the year had passed. The legacy of fear also extends outward, touching those beyond the firstborn. Younger siblings often live with survivor's guilt, a constant awareness that their elder brothers stand in the line of fire while they themselves remain outside it. Parents, too, carry unbearable strain, torn between hope and expectation, praying for one son's life while quietly preparing for his death. Communities whisper, neighbors speculate, and local folklore feeds the fire. In this way, the curse becomes not just a private terror but a communal story, woven into the identity of entire villages and towns. Some argue that the curse survives not because it is true but because fear itself is contagious. Stories, after all, are the most enduring of diseases. A man dies at 33, and a whisper begins. Another death follows, then another, and soon the whisper has become a roar. Each new generation inherits not only the fear but the confirmation, a cousin, a neighbor, a friend who died young. To break free from such fear is not simply to survive, it is to resist the very gravity of belief. Few succeed. Yet there are those who do. Survivors who live past the fatal age often describe an extraordinary transformation. For them, life beyond 33 is a gift they never expected to hold. Many devote themselves to charity, to teaching, to guiding younger generations, determined to make use of the years they believe were never truly theirs. Others retreat from the world, exhausted by decades of dread, choosing quiet lives far from the public eye. Both carry the same unshakable truth: fear shaped them, even if death did not take them. Perhaps the most haunting part of the curse's legacy is its adaptability. Though centuries have passed, and the modern world brims with science, medicine, and reason, the fear of the firstborn continues to find new soil. Online forums buzz with stories of men convinced their fate is sealed. Blogs share genealogical tragedies, pointing to 33 as the inevitable number. Paranormal researchers document modern cases with the same intensity as medieval monks once did. Even in the age of satellites and smartphones, the ancient fear survives, dressed in digital clothing but unchanged at its core. Skeptics argue that fear itself is the curse, that what we call the legacy is nothing more than a long chain of frightened minds passing their nightmares to the next link. But this explanation, while rational, does not erase the power of the story. For a man who grows up believing he will die, science may soothe but never silence. Fear is older than reason. And sometimes, it is stronger. The narrator's tone drops lower, more intimate. Imagine, for a moment, what it means to live as the firstborn under the shadow of this curse. Your childhood is colored by caution. Your adolescence is burdened by reminders. And when you reach adulthood, every ticking clock becomes a countdown. The curse does not need to strike to destroy you. It destroys you through anticipation, through the knowledge that your days are numbered, whether truly or falsely. This is the cruelest legacy of all, a prison of time that you carry within yourself. And yet, the story endures not only because of fear but because of fascination. Humanity has always been drawn to the forbidden, the uncanny, the mysterious patterns that hint at something beyond our control. The curse of the firstborn may be a tale of terror, but it is also a mirror, reflecting our deepest anxieties about destiny, inheritance, and the fragility of life. It reminds us how little power we truly hold, and how much we long for answers, even when none exist. The closing images flicker: ancient manuscripts, faded portraits, cracked tombstones, the faces of men long dead. Over them, the narrator speaks one final truth: perhaps the curse is real. Perhaps it is not. Perhaps it is nothing more than fear itself, dressed in the trappings of myth. But whether one believes or doubts, the legacy remains. Fear does not die when the body falls. Fear is the true firstborn, eternal and undying, passed from generation to generation, whispering in the bloodlines of humankind. The music swells, low and mournful, as the final words hang in the air. And so the curse endures, not in graves, but in memories. Not in death, but in fear. The question is not whether you believe in it. The question is whether it already believes in you. The screen fades to black.